I would like to introduce the members of this panel. We're going to try to have an informal discussion. There are no presentations. I'm going to put forward a few questions, and then please feel free to use Slido to put yours and make this discussion as lively as possible. Unfortunately, the policymaker is still engaged in the bathroom, but I think we can start just the same. May I introduce Werner, who is the founder and president of the International University Network. Chris Jagers, founder and CEO of Learning Machine, the technology partner in our pilot in Malta and many other pilots around the world. Thank you very much on behalf of the Maltese. Oh, here he is, Dimitrios Pikios. He's business manager for the new Europass and ESCO, the classification of skills, competencies, qualifications and occupations of the European Commission. And last, but not least, friend of mine, Balaji Venkataraman, who is an applied ICT specialist at the Commonwealth of Learning. So, I will be a bit formal in putting forward the question. I'm sticking to the how they were presented in the program. So, Christian, first question for you. We're going to look at the future, but still anchored at the present time. So, MOOCs have certainly disrupted higher education, and higher education continues to be very expensive, both for institutions and for the learners. We see universities rolling out fully online accredited graduate and postgraduate courses, but shall we see institutions really getting to grips with the reality of decentralization, student empowerment, and demands from industry and society?
Well, that's quite a big question to start with. Well, forgive me for saying so, but I don't think that MOOCs introduce something new at all. They just put existing materials in the online world. That's what we can observe all over the planet. Many places, the universities offer additional materials online, but there's still the conventional lectures where the students have to attend, and we have still all the conventional concepts. And the minister this morning said we have to change education. And so if we talk about disruption now, and if we talk about innovation, I think that the new technology enables us to introduce also new things in the educational world, but that means we really have to start there as well, because when we just put badges online, it's like putting content online instead of changing the whole system. Let me give you just one example, because I want to spare some time also for my other panel partners. Just recently, the city of Hamburg published a study where they found out that they need a bit more than €500 million to restore the facilities to an acceptable level. Not at all did they ever think of changing the educational model. So it's just bricks and mortar, like it used to be in the Middle Ages. And Alex this morning said we're stuck in the 20th century. The minister said we're stuck in the 19th century, and I would even go as far as saying we're stuck in the Middle Ages in many areas. So if we want to change things and use the new technology, then we need different kind of badges, different kinds of forms of assessment, and then we can use this new wonderful technology to move forward. And we also need standards, because if we just put a chaos of badges online, we will still have a chaos and will not move forward at all. So I think what we can learn also from this conference, that there is a strong desire for innovation in education, not just at higher education, but at all levels. And of course, as the minister again rightly said, it will disturb the teachers, it will disturb the administrators, it will disturb most of the people involved in education. But we will not have a relevant innovation without disturbing them.
Yes, thank you, Christian. Actually, Chris, listening to Christian, how you as technologists are you going to help this innovation? What can you offer? Not just in terms of technology, but in the way you can engage with institutions, with the learners, with educators, with policymakers, and put your technology and your expertise, which is very important, at their disposal.
I think this problem of education and equivalencies, understanding and usefulness really has two halves. You have content on one hand, and you have infrastructure on the other. And typically, the technologists like ourselves focus on the infrastructure. But it's important to us to be aware of all the content, conversations, and needs so that that infrastructure can have the place for all the content that the educational institutions come up with and that the employers come up with and others come to be important so that that infrastructure can easily absorb it and then provide the convenience, which is what we all want, to carry credentials or to have them verified.
Very good. Now, Dimitrios, from your part, European Commission, yes, European Union, a lot of good initiatives coming out in education. There's no doubt about it. Just before starting, I confessed with you that I had trouble actually to the formatting of the old Europass, but you told me, rest assured, the new Europass will be much easier to do. Now, speaking about the near future, how are the European Commission's initiatives actually supporting all these needs for innovation, for change, both from the technology side and also from the credentialing side and the assessment side?
Yes, thank you. What's very important for us from the policy point of view at the European Commission is to enhance visibility of all skills of people. Skills acquired through formal learning, but also skills acquired through informal, non-formal learning, in daily life, at work, including, of course, soft skills, transversal skills, which are increasingly important for recruiters, for employers, those people, they want to see those skills in the candidates. Indeed, we have the current Europass, and it has been decided to modernize it and to build a new Europass platform. In that context, there will be a component for digital qualifications in the new Europass. And the aim is to support trust of employers, trust of education providers, to what they see in the portfolios of the candidates for work, candidates for further training. And this will, we believe, in combination with coverage of all kinds of skills, will allow people to increase their opportunities, to have access to more opportunities for work, for further training. I'm talking about also a bigger package because we will have the new Europass, and we also have the ESCO, which is the European classification of skills, competencies, occupations, and qualifications. And this is like a reference language that allows better understanding and correct interpretation of skills across borders and across languages. And all these modules, if you will, together form this implementation of policy of the Commission right now. It's now being put in place. Later on, I will do a presentation, a short one, in a workshop of what we're talking about, and I'll be happy also to receive questions.
Just before going to Balaji and conclude this first round of discussion, I'd like to remind you that you can put forward your questions. The Slido is open. You're more than welcome, and please do put forward your questions because we would like to have this debate and not just the panel answering my questions. So, Balaji, from your experience of applied ICT, especially in the field of learning for development. Do you think that the current trend of technology becoming more diffused, more widespread, and it is more accessible in the financial terms, what you can buy today with the same amount of money is much more powerful than what we could buy 5, 10, 20 years ago? Do you think that this trend will continue and more people will be empowered with the upcoming technologies?
Thank you. Yes, indeed. First, you spoke in specific reference to hardware and internet access, but that is certainly improving. And in fact, I would say, if you look at developing countries, there is a new development, a trend rather, in terms of messaging. Messaging in developing countries is far more important than the social web, so to speak. Like WhatsApp in most parts of the developing world and WeChat in the area where Mandarin and Cantonese are spoken have over 1 billion users. In other words, that's nearly as big as the social web, and that trend is increasing, and more services are getting added to that. And in developing countries today, it's possible to build systems which do not require, like Professor Prabhakar spoke of using the so-called dumb phone as an access device for a variety of services. Today, you can access digital financial services using the same dumb phone as per that. There are over 100 million people doing that. So the spread is really well, it's taking place very well, and it is also creating new services that probably are not conceived of very easily in the OECD type situation. So there is a lot of scope and there is a lot of interest among policymakers as well.
Thank you. Balaji, we have the first question. Do you think that blockchain technology is a bundle?
A bubble? No, we seriously do not think so. In fact, I'll tell you, just a few months back, there was a meeting of Commonwealth educational ministers taking place in Fiji. Commonwealth is an association of countries that have common interest as well as varied interests. And there was a lot of differences on some matters, but the convergence was fast on one matter, namely how to bridge the gap between skills development and credentialing. And the ministers were saying that this should be the single point program for Commonwealth education ministers to work on. You can see it in the declaration too. And that's where we believe blockchain will make a huge difference. Because like you use dumb phones to access transactions, you can now use the same dumb phones to access the blockchain and blockchain offered services as well. And therefore the possibility is very real. That's why I see colleagues from Bahamas here, because their minister spoke with great interest on the deployment of blockchain. And in fact, we are going to have a follow-up conference for this event as a regional conference in Mauritius, primarily focusing on Eastern and Southern Africa, and Alex will lead the resource persons at that conference as well.
Next, would like to add about the bundle. From the policy point of view, from the technology point of view, or from the institutional point of view?
Okay, thank you. So, it's exactly the contrary, because the blockchain is addressing some very fundamental needs, like the necessity for transparency, but at the same time of security, and the need to safeguard against the loss of documents. And this is shown by the fact that there are so many applications on the blockchain right now covering many domains. I was reading the other day, for example, that there is an application now being developed for voting, for example, which you would think that for logistics, of course in finance primarily, but logistics, also in education, but also in voting. And I was quite surprised, and then I thought, yes, it makes sense when I read some details, I went over some description of this application. And it's no accident that it covers those needs, fundamental needs. There is a need to reduce costs, especially in this economic juncture, and it can be very. It is decentralized, and there are needs for that as well. So I think since it is a major answer to basic fundamental needs in the economy, in all aspects of our economy and society, it cannot be a bubble.
I actually think it's a good question. And it's worded in a broad way, blockchain technology, as if it's one thing. And I think there are certain projects that will be available, and there's many ongoing projects that aren't. I think we're at an early stage of the adoption curve, and it's important at this early stage that we don't take proprietary approaches to this technology. Because if you have the student records that are basically owned by one large government or one central authority, or through a proliferation of different siloed initiatives that aren't interoperable, then you end up where we are today. That the way we avoid the bubble is by taking a standards-based approach, by using open data standards like block certs to aid in the anchoring of records to any blockchain, and to ensure that they'll be verifiable, regardless of the blockchain they were anchored to. That without a standards-based approach, it will be a bubble.
Thank you. Questions are coming in. Another question. An issue is variance in structure of education. Like, for example, airport logistics management can be at university level in one nation and considered vocational in another. How can blockchain be used to manage this variance, this difference?
I'm afraid that blockchain technology is not the solution to this problem. This is kind of exactly what I tried to address. We have to resolve this problem before we put it on blockchain, but then blockchain is very helpful because it's easy to cross borders with electronic credentials. But in the first place, Europe has an important initiative, in my personal opinion, but there must be more than that. Currently, we just have the typical credentials, and we have a wonderful European qualification framework that is applied in very different ways in the European member states. So, just again to give you an example, maybe not from academia, in one country, vocational qualification is considered to be level 4 in Germany, for example, although the German qualification system is well known internationally and well respected, but they put it at level 4 because they wanted to defend the German high school, the German Abitur. So it's just a political thing. In other countries, it's at level 5 without a discussion. So students finishing qualification at a vocational level could enter a German university after additional 3 years of practical experience, and then they would get credits for, let's say, up to 1 semester. In the British system, for example, it would be their first qualification would be considered level 5, and they could enter a so-called top-up program. So in just 1 year, they can earn a bachelor degree compared to Germany, where it takes 2.5 years. So you see, in the beginning you need a discussion about that, and you have to harmonize the systems. And this was just on the more formal side, but also on the informal side. We need standards that allow us to transfer credits really across borders. And the technology then is very helpful, because if you then, for example, need official translations with apostille and everything, is very bureaucratic, and blockchain can be a very good solution, in my personal opinion.
For questions coming in, there are 2 questions actually that are related to each other. One of them is improving logistics at ports and airports through blockchain, but the other one is the blockchain going to replace jobs that are currently being taken by human beings? How many jobs will cease to exist in a few years' time? How many will become unemployed because of the blockchain? This is the usual emphasis on the machine taking place of the human being. What are your thoughts about this? The first thing that comes to mind is that blockchain is going to take the place of the registrar's office, or people working as registrar, the administrators, the people in enrollment, course enrollment, the people in administering the assessments, the grades. All these people will be without a job because of blockchain? I don't think so. I would like to hear your opinion.
So the first part of the question, whenever there's a new technology like blockchain that carries a lot of promise, it becomes a place for solving all of the problems in the world. And I think it's really important to focus on what it does and what it does not do. In these scenarios we're talking about, whether it's educational credentials or shipments and ports, what the blockchain does is provide convenient and secure and instant verification that something is true. It doesn't do anything else. Like there's all these questions about educational equivalencies and different types of education. That's not a problem the blockchain can solve. That's something universities and society has to solve. What the blockchain solves is convenient verification and ownership, frankly. When it comes to will greater convenience of education and ownership replace a few jobs, I hope so. I think that's what we all want, because imagine, this technology is as fundamental as the internet. Just as the internet revolutionized convenience of sharing information and communicating, the blockchain has the potential to revolutionize, and is revolutionizing, convenience and verification of digital assets and transactions. I think seeing it as a parallel to the internet is a good one, and asking the question exactly how many jobs may be lost in the short term misses the bigger point, which is how many new jobs are going to be created because of new technologies come around. How can registrars refocus on helping their students on the human side of their services rather than doing what machines can do automatically? So it's an opportunity to access human potential and value as opposed to sticking with mundane tasks that computers frankly do better.
Yes, I fully agree, especially on the last point that now it becomes even more important for people to upscale in terms of transversal skills, what machines cannot do. Still, the human brain and the human judgment will need to be there, apart from the fact that nobody can say now that this is the number of jobs that will be lost and that is the number of jobs that will be created. This is too speculative, and it cannot be an educated judgment behind such a calculation. But there will be jobs created, and there will be still a full need for human judgment and human, even emotion, human skills to drive this innovation and to make it work, because machines themselves are not going to the blockchain itself. It's a technology. It's a tool, and it has to be used still by the humans.
Balaji?
We should see blockchain more as a support system for a society with a lot of aspirations. In developing countries, there is a lot of felt need for conversion of qualifications or experience into more formal qualifications. So you get better carpenters, better plumbers, electricians, etc. Now, blockchain, we believe, can aid that process. Blockchain can aid greater mobility between institutions of students and learners, between their professions and institutions. And as long as we have a new framework for recognizing this mobility, blockchain will play a role in creating even new jobs.
Indeed, Balaji, I have a question which I think you can address. How can blockchain help reduce inequality, which is a very, very big issue in terms of development?
Thank you. In fact, if you look at this gross enrollment ratio in tertiary sector, a country like United States, which is a large country, has more than 90%. Meaning 90% of college-going age people are all in colleges. Whereas if you look at a much smaller country like Seychelles, which is smaller than Malta, has less than 15% or less than 1/6 of the population in colleges. So there is a felt need for moving people through qualifications into productive employment. And this problem is more severe in developing countries, even in smaller countries. That's where supportive frameworks and supportive technologies like blockchain can make a huge difference. Because experience can now get recognition as a qualification, as a micro qualification, and through that people can have a career path that can advance further.
Thank you. Dimitrios, yes?
Yes, thank you. Inequality is very much linked to economic means, financial ability. So since the blockchain reduces the costs of having visible, and we hope to make it work in that way, meaning to make it work so that even softer, more transversal skills of people are visible, and we hope that people will be able, in a verifiable way, to demonstrate to employers, to education providers, that they have skills gained outside the classical education environment. This enhances visibility of skills, increases opportunities of people for further training, education, for employment, takes them closer there, and by its very nature, it means a reduction of inequality.
I totally agree to what you said. I just would like to add that permeability is another very important aspect, because if we have educational systems that do not allow people to really move up, because we do not accept them to transfer from a vocational or even informal background to a formal background, then we just close the door and we don't give them the opportunity they deserve. So we need more flexibility also, for example, on the master level, and there are already some countries like Austria that practice this concept, where they allow people with a very good work record and relevant experiences to enter a master program without having a high school degree, without having a bachelor degree. And I think that's just one example. We need exactly the same on the level of secondary school. So I think probability in general is something that should be put on the test, and that's something we have to improve.
Christian, I think we are a bunch of optimists here. We're very optimistic about what blockchain can do, what it cannot do, especially about the good things it will do. But here I have a question with 3 votes. Since the pilots are showing the way forward, and we're quite satisfied and quite optimistic, when is the critical mass percentage of the population and business which needs to be reached to have blockchain considered as the new modus operandi? Chris, you said internet started things, now blockchain is going to take us to the next level, but how long will it take for everyone to understand the blockchain the same as we understand Facebook like, a tweet, internet web page, and what have you?
Well, I think if you ask the average person how an email works or text messaging works, they don't actually understand. It just works, and it's convenient, and they'd rather have it than not have it. And I think blockchain will slowly come into our lives in the same way. Again, if it happens in an open way. You know, and these examples I gave were chosen carefully, because if you look at any new technology, the big vendors try to own them at first, whether it was BlackBerry Messenger or AOL Mail, and then these proprietary approaches are wiped out as soon as there's an open standard, whether it's SMS or SMTP. These open standards allow all companies to build services and then compete on providing the best quality and service. And so that's what needs to happen with blockchain, not to see some big vendor do winner take all, but to have it invisibly permeate our lives and just work. That's when it becomes really powerful.
Dimitrios, from the policy point of view, I think you're facilitating this and making it possible and to happen quite fast.
Yes, well, a historical example of critical mass can be, what comes to my mind, for example, is the existing Eurobus, which was launched in 2004. Of course, at the beginning, it had a certain number of users, which grew. In time now, we see that it has been used over 180 million times, which is quite impressive. So it takes time. It depends on how it works for users, if users find it convenient or not. It has to be not very technical, or not technical at all. As Martin said, I mean, I'm not an IT person, so I don't really know how my email account works, but I'm satisfied that I can press 2 buttons, or 1, and communicate with people immediately. So also I agree on as regards the openness. It has to be open, and interoperability is also something very important, so that different platforms, different systems can communicate, can understand each other, open native formats, open standards. This is what we need, and this is our aspiration also for the new Eurobus, so that people can, for example, apply somewhere on the new Eurobus platform or on another platform through a job board, so they can carry their portfolios around and they can verify and demonstrate their skills, be it digital qualifications, other kinds of digital design certificates based on the blockchain.
Indeed, Dimitrios, I have a question which ties exactly with what you were saying. How do we preclude balkanization with all these national blockchain projects? Do we need new international understandings, such as the Apostolic Convention?
One of the balkanization is what? Because I come from the Balkans. Yeah, I understand. Yeah, we're too many there, and sometimes we are on each other's throats. But as we see it now, one of the challenges that our new project is hoping to address is to avoid that competing, incompatible national or proprietary solutions evolve in time. We need common standards. We're not in competition ourselves with this project. We're coming up with a technical standard to be used by everybody, and in an open way, hopefully. This is what we understand right now, but of course we're only at the start, as I will explain later. For example, now we have just launched a few days ago the implementation phase of our business analysis, which will lead to these specifications for the further IT development. We have our principles. We fully agree that this is not something that the world needs, that Europe needs, to have such a compatibility, and we are going to tackle this hopefully through the new Eurobus platform.
Thank you, Dimitrios. Chris, I think this is up your line. Isn't a hierarchical public infrastructure for digital signatures an efficient option in many of the cases? Blockchain is used in higher education. Public infrastructure.
Yeah, public key infrastructure, PKI, has been around a very long time, and it hasn't taken off. Its popularity has never ignited. I think there's many reasons for that, but the truth is that the blockchain infrastructure has several technical advantages over traditional PKI infrastructure. Let me say the simple explanation first, and then something slightly more technical for those more technical in the crowd. Using the blockchain to verify educational records is just like PKI infrastructure, except rather than trusting a central authority to verify the hash, you're trusting a decentralized network because it's less prone to being hacked, it's less prone to collapse. It's just simply more durable infrastructure that can provide faster, cheaper verification even across sovereign jurisdictions. So there's a convenience bonus there. There's also a technical bonus in that in traditional PKI infrastructure, timestamps are baked into the document itself, whereas with blockchain infrastructure, you have independent timestamping, which allows for secure key rotation and a variety of other technical advantages that traditional PKI doesn't have. So I know that didn't make sense to most people in the room, but if you'd like to talk about it later, I'm happy to over lunch.
Thank you. I have a question for Balaji and Christian. It's about the acceptability of non-formal and formal self-attestations. How could the blockchain come in terms of this non-formal and informal certificates? You show your skills. From your point of view, Christian, representing formal institutions like universities, how would you tackle it? How would you see that enhancing your role as a provider of formal education?
Well, I think it's quite helpful because, for example, if someone applies for a program at a university, he needs to show that he meets the entrance requirements. So if you accept informal competencies, then you need kind of assurance that this is not just a fake statement where someone tells you, I have done this and this and that, and now I'm qualified. So if you use this more like a learning portfolio where you document what you have learned, what you have achieved, and then you use it later on, then it's quite reliable. And it's very hard to manipulate documents like that. And therefore, it's something universities probably use to accept students to, let's say, a master's degree without a first form degree, or to a bachelor degree without a high school qualification.
We call it recognition of prior learning, something which is also coming in Malta. Yes, and Balaji, from your point of view of development, we've seen earlier on the example of MOOC, how it is actually making it possible to provide for free MOOCs on a platform to people who didn't have, perhaps in the past, because of financial reasons or other reasons, access to formal education. How would you see informal and non-formal education being supported by blockchain?
This is a very, very important question, and in fact, this is exactly what, in my view, the ministers were also trying to address. They first recognized the fact that the credentialing power stays primarily with the tertiary institutions and with ministries who are overseeing the conduct of tertiary institutions. And sometime back, you must have heard of this movie, Slumdog Millionaire. And there was the man who wrote the original novel is now the High Commissioner of India in Canada. He visited the Commonwealth of London. And he mentioned to us that as a bureaucrat, as a civil servant, he found that it was impossible to get the Skills Development Ministry to work with the Ministry of Higher Education. And he said, what's the solution? He said, we don't have a solution, at this point in time. And the solution will come in when there are enabling technologies. And blockchain is one such enabling technology. I can imagine a carpenter who's in his early 20s practicing his skill and his trade, using a very simple dumb phone to access a blockchain where he's able to enter a record of a number of his activities and achievements, and that being verified later by a polytechnic for potential admission to one of their programs. After discounting for certain features, they may still be able to recognize his skills. And this is exactly what appeals to ministers who cannot afford to go on building tertiary education institutions to accommodate millions and millions of new students.
Maybe I can add just one more thing, because usually if we look at entrance requirements for universities, you apply and it's a go or no go. I think also in this case we need, in this regard, we need more flexibility. So this carpenter, for example, he applies for the Polytechnic, and they could still say, okay, that looks pretty good, but you still need this and that qualification. You could already start to study, but maybe in the first year of your studies, you have to add 2 other modules that the other students don't have to study to end up with the full qualification after 3 years or after 2.5 years. So I think that also is an important aspect that we need more flexibility.
I have a question about trust. Trust, I think, is one of the most important ingredients in this recipe that we have been trying to concoct and work out today. And the question says, talking about encryption and privacy protection, how can any user make informed decisions without significant technical knowledge? Facebook says, just trust us. Chris, should we trust Facebook? Should we trust the blockchain more than Facebook?
Well, it's sort of like, do you trust mathematics or a private company more? And ideally you would trust a system that's open and inspectable and governed by rules that are hard to change, not by the rules of individuals that may have other kinds of motivations. So again, absolutely, as I've said over and over, the end users, people, learners, shouldn't have to understand the technology. It needs to be super convenient in order to take off.
I put forward the suggestion to put the like button on any blockchain certificate or blockchain application, maybe that may make it more popular.
It is important to point out that this movement is a reaction to the centralization of things like Facebook that sells people, that gathers more data than people are aware and sells it. This, in line with GDPR, puts people in charge of their own data, and it cannot be shared unless they choose to share it. And if they want to get rid of it, they can just delete it. So it is exactly a response to some of the frustration that's been happening with companies like Facebook. And so it's important for those that are trying to understand blockchain to understand the underlying values, that it puts privacy and ownership first. And if there's a solution that doesn't do that, then it's undermining the very values that blockchain promises to bring.
Yeah, I think it's a good example of how technology and, let me say, real life are interrelated, because if you trust the technology but you don't trust the institution that grants this degree, then you still have a problem. And especially for informal qualification, we need things like the Europass, Dimitrios, because you set the standards and you're kind of the acting institution, because you are in charge of quality control. If people with the Europass have definitely the qualification it says, then it's very useful. Then they build trust, the employers will build trust, and I think that's what makes the whole system successful.
Yeah, I fully agree. Because in the first place, people need not to bother themselves with the technical aspects. At the same time, they need to know to be reassured with the quality of what they see of the product that any technical application brings to them, to facilitate their lives rather than make them even more difficult. We all have very difficult lives on a daily basis, so we don't want our digital tools to make them even more difficult, or to, because of them, to enter into risks related to our data, related to our judgments in general. To accept, for example, me as an employer, let's say I was an employer, can I trust this technology for telling me the truth that a candidate has this or that qualification or skills learned in another way? I think that also all this noise and negative noise lately around the Bitcoin is another factor that we have to take into account. So all people know that the Bitcoin is based on the blockchain. I would believe that people really understand this, so maybe there is a negative reflex when they encounter the blockchain, meaning an SME owner, a businessman who is in the business of building furniture, for example, cannot spend money to understand what this is. So we need to make sure that those people have very good results right from the start. They enjoy full safety of their data, full quality of the product they receive.
And unfortunately, we're running out of time, but I have a question out of the 10 still pending. I'm sorry, we don't have the time. If you agree, we'll stay here, we'll pass on lunch, and we'll continue debating. It's my life, okay, this is my life. And the very, very last question, if we are to come here again in 5 years' time, and I really would like to invite you, perhaps to have a little, weather is a little better, more typical of Malta at this time of the year. If we look back for over the past 5 years, what would we say in terms of the blockchains in education success? What we would say, these were the factors that really made it a success, or we would say these were the challenges that we didn't really take care of. I would like a little comment from each one of you and then conclude the debate.
If I may. So hopefully 5 years from now, we will have the Europass platform with the digital qualifications and digitally signed certificates up and running. Currently, the aim is to launch it by the end of 2019. So So we will be talking about the history of 3.5 years of this technical standard. Hopefully we will have millions of users, and hopefully we will be able even to have calculated somehow its impact in a pan-European level, in visibility of skills, but primarily on employment rates. This is what I expect, but I trust that it will be a success thanks to the technology, because the technology is really very important and will work.
Chris?
Well, I have a lot of confidence, in part because of the Everest Bartolo here in the Ministry of Education and Employment and his values of, and others like Alex and those who are here. Malta has been a great example of ensuring that there's practical value to the experiment, to making sure that learners benefit, to not looking at it in isolation, that it doesn't just have to be easy for institutions to issue credentials. It doesn't just have to be easy for recipients to receive their credentials. Employers need to be connected with this, and they need to be able to easily read and verify their credentials and understand their credentials. And all of that needs to lead to hiring and improving economic outcomes for the country. So I hope that in 5 years we see the network really operating all together in a way that continues to be standards-based. And that serves as an emblem for the rest of the world on how to do it. And I think Malta is doing a great job in starting that process.
Balaji?
You know, in 5 years' time, the standard setting process would have advanced at a considerable level. I know from conversations with officials from developing countries that 25 or 30 years back, when internet standards were built, they were built in a small number of countries by a small group of people. And governments eventually accepted that because it was convenient. Now it's very unlikely that they will let it happen this time. This time every country in a given style will play a role because they don't want to be swamped by a standard that they did not play a role in setting. They always refer to ICANN as an example. And so that's unlikely to happen. That process will have advanced considerably in 5 years' time. And we will see real implementations, like we see real implementation in Malta and a few more places, even in large countries. Maybe in some instances, like for example, Professor Prabhakar referred to his trial in education. But in the same country, the police commissioner of a large city has already issued instructions that every lodging house in his city must use a blockchain while registering any entrant, because that's the only way he believes he can fight crime. And so these things will be advancing far more rapidly than they think. And my own hope is that the 3CL, which my organization helped found, will be playing a pivotal role because it sits in the interface between the EU and the common.
Thank you, Balaji. Christian?
I don't really dare to predict what we will think in 5 years.
5 years, not 10 or 15.
No, but still, if you ask me for wishful thinking, I have a clear opinion. I think we will look at, I hope we will look back and say, well, we have overcome a lot of challenges that we did not see at the time. We managed to collaborate, we managed to interact in a constructive way, and finally we used the impulses of blockchain technology to reinvent education.
It's a very nice thought, reinventing education. So I'd like to thank the members of the panel, Christian Werner, Chris Jagers, Dimitrios Pikios, and Balaji Venkataraman.